You guys thought I was snarky before? Folks, we're just getting started. Good day, friends. If you watched enough CosTube videos, you may have figured out that there's a fascination with what is, arguably, history's most intimate garment, the tank top. No, I'm being serious. By the end of the Edwardian era, the humble chemise was on its way to retirement, to be replaced with the lacy camisole, the functional slip, and eventually, the tank. While I regularly launder the husbeast's humble cotton undershirts, the female analog really hasn't been part of the everyday casual wardrobe in a long time. It's become a standalone seasonal garment that you really only see in summer, or if you live in warmer climates. Kinda like Tolkien's Galadriel, the chemise has diminished and gone into the West. So this video isn't going to be Bernadette Banner sharing her unique insights on an extant garment and creating a new chemise with the information. It's also not going to be Kate of Willoughby and Rose waxing poetic over the lack of quality control in the linen industry, and I'm highly unlikely to hold a bardcore dance party in my exceptionally cluttered rec room. Sorry, Abby. Instead, I'm making an Edwardian chemise from a pattern because I need all the help I can get. During the planning and dreaming stages of the project, I dug out the chemise I'd made back in the early 2000s. It's been sitting in a storage bin for the better part of 15 years, and even after washing, it still looks dodgy. The garage has not been kind to this first attempt at historical undies. It has some unfortunate yellow staining that's never coming out. I would bleach it, but the gods of laundry have not been kind to me, and every time I dare to use bleach, they exact a toll. Usually in the form of little droplets on black garments that couldn't have had any contact whatsoever with either the bleach or the bleach receptacle on the washing machine. So no bleach. Last time they took a black tank top. Prophetic? Possibly. Annoying? Assuredly. Did that stop me from trying to shove this thing over my head the moment I pulled it out of the bin? No. Did I immediately stuff the chemise in the wash and then take a shower? Yeah. I'm going to be really clear here. This chemise has never fit me well. As icky as it felt to put it on, I was impressed that it even cleared my shoulders. It was too tight in the bust, and the arms were just a no-go all around. Yes, it was made when I was a smaller person, but even then I was on the larger end of the sizing scale, and apparently the width of the fabric I used to make this chemise was on the small side, because it was always tight in the bust and the arms, even in 2003. I don't know how many people realize this, but sizing for larger women has come a long way in the past 20 years. When I was a teenager, stores catering to larger girls, let alone with fashionable styles and prints, were almost non-existent, particularly if you lived in an area where you had to travel to a larger city to do your clothes shopping. For me, it was a big deal when the local Reitmans started carrying low-end plus sizes. They never fit very well, but it was better than going on a crying jag every time I tried on a pair of normal-sized pants that were always just a couple of inches too small in various places. I spent a lot of time in my teens wearing clothing that was a bit old for me, because mature women were allowed to carry extra weight. That meant a lot of jersey knits and t-shirts with appliques on the chest. Think of your grandma's casual wear. Now think of that clothing on a 16-year-old who just wants to dress goth. Now there's something that will really make you depressed. There's something really horrible about feeling like you're being punished for wanting to do something as simple as wear clothes. Clothes that you like, clothes that are like the things that your friends are wearing, clothes that don't go out of their way to scream, "Look at me, I'm large and should be reminded of it every time I get dressed." I may not always like the styles and prints available from Chanel, Penningtons, and Torrid, but I love that they've made fashionable clothing that fits, accessible to larger women. I get the whole movement against fast fashion, and I really do support it, but let's be very clear here. There's a tiny bit of thin privilege when it comes to fast fashion. Women of larger sizes have a much more restrictive pool of clothing to choose from, and the clothing is often more expensive. Sometimes vastly more expensive, which is a serious deterrent to buying more clothes than you actually need. The slight air of shabbiness that I constantly fight against can mostly be chalked up to the fact that I wear clothes out. If I have a hoodie that fits, it gets worn until the cuffs are absolutely tattered and the zipper tab is so frayed it can no longer be zipped. Jeans? Until they develop holes in places that can't be patched. And I'm not the only one. When I've had to go clothes shopping, I've gotten the impression from the sales staff that this is a common feeling among larger women in my age range. I say this to the women of size in my audience. You matter. You need clothes. With some very rare exceptions, I'd say the bulk of the conversation regarding fast fashion doesn't really apply to those of us with a modest income buying the occasional item for our wardrobe. Yes, fast fashion and overconsumption is a problem, but from my own experience as someone who has never been a standard size, we're too choosy and neurotic about our wardrobes to regularly buy clothes that get worn once and then thrown out. On the whole, we are not the problem. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. So I'm making a glorified tank top, and there are two obvious obstacles: sizing and skill. Sizing because Edwardian chemises weren't just a matter of sewing a couple of gores and gussets onto a bolt of fabric and calling it a day. I'm oversimplifying, so don't kill me, hand sewers of the internets. By the Edwardian era, we were starting to see clothing with a little bit more fit and tailoring. Chemises, corset covers, and combination underwear often didn't include sleeves unless they were made specifically for colder weather. Otherwise, sleeves were sewn directly onto other layers such as dresses and shirtwaists, much as we do today. What we're seeing is a sleeveless tank with a blinged out yoke. In some cases it looks like handwork lace, in others machined lace that's been inserted. So no sleeves, gussets, or gores. Technically I could make a gathered tube of fabric, put a couple of lace straps on it, and be done with it. Thing is, I don't trust my sewing skills with even this simple a task. Aside from a few face masks and piecing together some knitting, I haven't done much sewing over the past 15 years. So I went looking for a pattern. Here's where sizing becomes an issue. I'm at the top of my size range. I'm somewhere around 5'7.5", 5'8", and before COVID hit, had already regained a bunch of weight that I'd lost 2 years previously. It came back, it brought friends. I'm trying to lose it again, but it didn't go on overnight, so it's not going to come off overnight either. If you came here looking to see some sort of pretty lacy fantasy lingerie, I'm gonna disappoint you right now. Besides, I'm more of a Stephen King fan, so welcome to my cotton nightmare. My cotton stores include about 5 meters of white muslin that I picked up thinking I'd make a chemise of some sort. Renaissance or Regency maybe. The width is almost twice that of the original chemise, so that brought my anxiety down a bit. I also have a bit of this nice blue and a soft lilac. Possibly the last two are cotton poly blends, but I've yet to do a burn test. Our household smoke detectors are a little twitchy. After doing some searching on the internet, I found that Truly Victorian has an expanded size range. The fun part about Truly Victorian, and I say fun the way some folks say utterly maddening, is that most of the reviews I've watched or read start off with, "I've heard really great things about," and then totally devolve into a complete train wreck of disappointment and regret from there on. For all of you hopeful authors out there, this is something we call foreshadowing. I am, unfortunately, at the very end of Truly Victorian size range. I have absolutely no idea how much ease they build into their garments. This could be a total dumpster fire of a project. In the words of the late great Stan Lee, Excelsior! One thing I'll say for Truly Victorian, they give you the option to download the pattern in digital format and do the printing yourself. I've seen this option offered on some of the big commercial pattern companies' websites, but I was always a bit hesitant to try it out. Probably because they rarely offer my current size, but also because I wasn't sure they would actually work out. Patterns can be pretty large, and I'm not just talking about my own personal size issues here. They like to print these things out on huge pieces of tissue, so the thought of going through that much ink was daunting. There was the option of sending out the digital file off to someplace like Staples, or I don't even know if Kinko's is still around in our area, but I think a local sewing supply store will do large-scale pattern print jobs. I have a printer with a dried-up color cartridge and a black cartridge that needs using before it goes the way of its buddy. Printing the individual pages to be pieced together was fairly easy. Piecing them together was a little more difficult. Once the pattern gets to a certain size, if you have one page just a little out of whack, it can throw the whole thing off. Or maybe that's just me. My dad was an industrial designer, and he used to blow a gasket over measurements being out by a couple of millimeters. Perhaps that's a trait I've picked up from him. In his defense, having to cut a new countertop for a custom kitchen is a costly proposition if you're out by a couple of millimeters. You don't think it's noticeable, but it is. It really is. The chemise has 3 pattern pieces, by the by. The rest of the pattern is mostly underpants. Literally. And by literally, I mean I'm being literal. There's a pair of French drawers in this package. As the chemise sits at the bottom of the clothing layer closest to the body, I figured the light lilac cotton would be best. This would allow me to use the white cotton for the corset cover and drawers, giving a fairly neutral base for any colored clothing that I'll be layering on top. You don't want your white shirtwaist to take on a light purple tinge, right? Right. Here's where I came across my first problem. No matter which way I tried to cut out the fabric, the pattern was either too tall or too wide. Yes, there were a couple of different layout options mentioned in the pattern. I tried the layouts with both the lilac fabric and the white muslin, as I had bought it with width in mind. The result was the same either way. If I used one method, I could fit the length of the body, but it would chop off one of the sides. I'd have to put in a gore, and I'd have to do some juggling to make sure I had enough fabric to do so. If I could fit the width, the length became an issue. Chop about 2 or 3 inches from the bottom of the pattern, or cut the straps short and use some scraps to make up the difference. In retrospect, the first option might have been a better choice, but I wanted to see the actual length of the chemise. I went with option 2. There was plenty of leftover fabric to make up the difference in the shoulder straps, and I can always cover the seams with lace or ribbon. The instructions are really quite simple. Seam the chemise up the sides, run some gathers across the front, and install the yoke. Finish your edges with lace and you have a chemise. You may have already realized that I don't do simple very well. I cut out the pieces and entirely forgot to mark the right and wrong sides. Attempts have been made to identify the right and wrong sides, but it's entirely possible I'm way out to lunch on that one. It's fortunate the fabric is pretty indistinct on either side. I matched up the pieces and the pieces of the pieces and seamed the big stuff. That would be the sides of the chemise and the straps. I had a few moments of annoyance when the straps proved to be seamed on the incorrect side, but that was soon fixed. In fact, I believe I fixed that problem a couple of times. I ran the gathering stitches by hand because as much as I love my new-to-me sewing machine, I don't trust myself to sew in a straight line quite yet. Then I proved that I can't hand sew in a straight line either. The difference is that the machine sewing could have been catastrophic, whereas hand sewing is just a minor disaster. And then the yoke. The yoke is a 3-piece affair. The front yoke piece, the back yoke piece, and where they attach to the body of the chemise. Folks, I had to read the instructions about 3 or 4 times to get this right, and I am still not certain I figured it out. The idea is to bling out the front and back yoke pieces and then attach them to the body in such a way that you then cover up the seams with lace or ribbon. The instructions are simultaneously highly specific and yet extremely vague. I wound up sending the PDF to my mother to get confirmation that I wasn't reading things incorrectly. No, She told me the instructions were minimal and referred me to a couple of books. In return, I have proposed that we get together sometime in the very near future to bling out my chemise. That's right, we're not finished this puppy. Not gonna lie, it's taken me 2 weeks to get to this point, and I'm less than happy. There are outstanding circumstances for the delay, but when it all comes together in the end, I think you'll be fully satisfied. Okay, I know most of these patterns are made by sewists for sewists. There is the assumption that you have a decent idea of what you're doing, that you know the style of the garment you were shooting for, that you are probably a recreation junkie. There's a nice picture on the front of the package that shows the proposed finished project, as well as illustrations of samples of similar garments on the inside. This is all very lovely, but if you're like me and refer to the digital instructions on your iPad or phone, chances are pretty good you're not going to be seeing much of those examples. Let's also put something else in perspective. What if I'm not an Edwardian fashion junkie who is already familiar with the look of that era's undergarments? Shouldn't there be a diagram with some placement ideas? What if I'm an aunt helping her nibbling with a cosplay? What if I'm helping a friend who doesn't sew? What if I'm brushing off long dormant skills and relying on internet videos to demonstrate a technique? Where is the extra information specific to the design of this garment to give me an idea of how to not look totally unprepared in front of an audience of more than 400 people? Friends, I had to go hunting just for the seam allowance information. It wasn't marked on the pattern like a Butterick McCall simplicity affair. It wasn't listed at the front of the pattern. I was deathly scared that if the seam allowance was included in the pattern, the garment would wind up being about an inch too small. We've already determined that I have a justifiable anxiety about pattern sizing. I was also worried that I'd have to dig out my sewing calipers and have to add seam allowance to the edges of the pattern pieces. I finally asked someone on one of my Discord groups. Turns out the information was there, it was just somewhat buried. The seam allowance is included in the pattern, and I have given the chemise a try on over a tank and yoga pants. It does fit. There is a truly Victorian Facebook group. I've joined it, and I could probably pester someone about it there, but that's also a good way to get dogpiled by other folks who actually have a clue what they're doing. One of the things I've come to learn from producing sock knitting patterns is that there's a really fine line between hand-holding and insufficient information. It's a sliding scale, and I don't know exactly where this pattern falls. The husbeast will swear up, down, and sideways that I regard instructions as something that other people follow. He's formed this opinion over years of watching me take apart and put together home networking and theater equipment, various computers, and the occasional package of flat pack furniture. The problem with this hypothesis is that I have a general sense of what I'm doing when I work on home networks, home theaters, and IKEA. When I don't know what I'm doing, I refer to the manual. It's just rare enough he doesn't see it very often. You have no idea how many times I picked up my iPad, read a line or two, put the iPad down, fiddled with 2 or 3 pieces of fabric, then repeated that process. It's not that I don't know how to follow instructions. I've knit a few baby sweaters that technically classify as origami. I don't need hand-holding, but there's just something that's not right with this pattern, if you know what I mean. And this is a chemise. Imagine how dramatic things will get by the time I get around to making a shirtwaist blouse. At time of editing, I have finished the edges around the armholes, and I'm working on the hem. I'm doing all these edges by hand. I know the instructions say to finish with lace or what have you, but I'm one of those unfortunate souls with sensitive skin, so putting possibly itchy lace over a raw edge in lieu of proper finishing isn't really an option. Plus it looks nicer. This isn't the last you will see of the chemise. Keep your eyes peeled for an update in the next couple of weeks. If you haven't already clicked the subscribe button, now's probably a good time. The bell will give you all sorts of options so you can be notified when I update. If you don't want to miss the eventual episode of Pimp My Chemise, you might want to consider giving it a ding.